How are you all tonight? Since I don't have a microphone, it would help me if those of you who are there could come sit up here and help my voice out a little bit. But very glad to have you all here. The presentation is kind of a general one on how the Catholic Church perceives the construction of our buildings and the arrangement of sanctuaries, so that you kind of know what to expect. I know when you go in from one Catholic church to a different one, some things look the same and some things just look very different. And it's fine. There are a lot of variations on how this can happen. But I wanted to share a little of this with you so you have some idea about what to expect. I've got about 30 different slides to show you. I was trying to keep this presentation to about an hour so you could get home at a reasonable time. I'll try to wrap up about 8, but we should have time for questions and comments along the way. I've put a PDF of the slides I'm going to show you on my website, paulturner.org. If you go there and look under presentations, you'll find them. They should be up there now. If you can see that any better than on the screen, you're welcome to use your device and dial it up. If you want your own copy of the slides, you may find them there and take them, but they're only there for about a day. They will come down. Please don't come back after me and say I didn't get them. All I can say is sorry, okay? but if you want them, please go out and grab what you would like. One of the foundational biblical passages we use for church building is this one from the first letter of Peter, where he writes, "Like living stones, let yourselves be built into a spiritual house, to be a holy priesthood, to offer spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ." It's a beautiful passage that lies underneath how we see ourselves as church, and even applies this metaphor that as a church is built of blocks, we are the living blocks that go to make up this living church. And beyond that, we even have a responsibility as a priesthood that offers sacrifices to God. You know this from your own baptism, that you're baptized as a member of Christ, priest, prophet, and king. So all of us have priestly duties, especially when we are gathered together in a church for the Mass. GIRM is an abbreviation for the General Instruction of the Roman Missal. It is the document in the front of the big red book that you see us priests use during Mass, the Roman Missal. The instruction gives us the points that we follow in order to celebrate Mass correctly. And late in the document, it's only got about maybe 400 numbers in it, but around number 288, it says this: "For the celebration of the Eucharist, the people of God are normally gathered together in a church, or if there is no church, or if it's too small, then in another respectable place that is nonetheless worthy of so great a mystery. Therefore, churches or other places should be suitable for carrying out the sacred action and for ensuring the active participation of the faithful. Moreover, sacred buildings and requisites for divine worship should be truly worthy and beautiful, and be signs and symbols of heavenly realities." So it's a very broad definition of what a church should look like, but you do get this sense that beauty is going to be part of it. It's going to help us enter into the mystery of being in God's presence. But also notice the importance that is given to the active participation of the faithful. The A church is slightly different from, let's say, a symphony hall where all of the action takes place on a stage, or a theater where all of the action is on the stage. Even in a theater, actors are interacting with the audience. If we laugh or applaud or gasp, then they'll interact with us. But at Mass, in a sense, everybody's on stage, if you will. The participation of the people is active. We all have things to say no matter where you are seated, and that participation has to be nurtured. So a church building has to be constructed in a way that people can get engaged and not be withdrawn when they are present for the Mass, but drawn into it and participating very, very fittingly. A little bit later in the same general instruction, the suitable arrangement of a church and of what goes with it in such a way as to meet appropriately the needs of our own age requires not only that care be taken as regards whatever pertains more immediately to the celebration of sacred actions, but also that the faithful be provided with whatever is conducive to their appropriate comfort and is normally provided in places where people habitually gather. I think this is a long, complicated sentence to say, give them restrooms, give them parking, give them what they need in order to be present and engage in this activity, because it's a public gathering space. So we have to be careful about those matters as well. The people of God, which is gathered for Mass, is coherently and hierarchically ordered. And this finds its expression in the variety of ministries and the variety of actions according to the different parts of the celebration. Hence, the general arrangement of the sacred building must be such that in some way it conveys the image of the assembled congregation and allows the appropriate ordering of all the participants, as well as facilitating each in the proper carrying out of this function. So this is why we have sanctuaries that are different from the nave, because there is a hierarchical ordering of the responsibilities. So certain parts of the building are going to look different from other parts. The faithful and the schola, the choir, shall have a place that facilitates their active participation. So choir lofts are not required. We do have one here at the Cathedral, but a lot of parishes do not. But the active participation is the determining value for where everybody goes. Choir lofts can be lovely, but they are also dangerous in the sense that people who sit there are tempted just to participate in their activity and nothing more. The same is true of live streaming or ushers. Anybody who's got a little area where they park themselves, it's tempting to pay attention to this and not the readings, not the singing, not the responses, not the proper postures. So it's a challenge with a choir loft or any of the other people who have specific duties, especially when they're removed, to be fully actively participating in everything. But this is important. And now that cameras are so accessible to everybody, you find a lot of people come at church assuming that one of their duties is to keep a photographic record of what they are about to see. And so they will arrange themselves, withdraw from the experience in order to get the shot. And I'm not saying all this is inappropriate. I'm just saying your first duty is to participate at the Mass. You're there for all of the things that the people are to do at the Mass. The priest, celebrant, the deacon, and the other ministers have places in the sanctuary. There also should be prepared seats for concelebrants, but if their number is great, seats should be arranged in another part of the church, though near the altar. So here, as big as our cathedral is, the sanctuary is fairly small when it comes to concelebrants. We can get 2 or 3 of us up there, but gets much more than that. It really looks better if we're in a pew close to the altar rather than somewhere else. All these elements, even though they must express the hierarchical structure and the diversity of functions, should nevertheless bring about a close and coherent unity that is clearly expressive of the unity of the entire holy people. Indeed, the nature and beauty of the place and all its furnishings should foster devotion and express visually the holiness of the mysteries celebrated there. Now, one of the points they're making here is a point made by the Second Vatican Council's Constitution, Lumen Gentium, on the people of God who make up the church. We are all one, and we have a certain hierarchy within the people of God. The liturgy reflects that. The sanctuary, the arrangement of a church building reflects that. There will be diversity of responsibilities, but it all coheres into a single unity. We should all feel as though we are one. The United States Conference of Catholic Bishops has issued some guidelines for celebrating sacraments with persons with disabilities. And I thought it would be good for you to see a few points of this as they pertain to church buildings. This entire document is useful if you have questions about how does a person with a disability receive First Communion or go to confession, or how are they eligible for confirmation. All of these are handled in this document, but they say these things about the building. Parish sacramental celebrations should be accessible to persons with disabilities and open to their full, active, and conscious participation according to their capacity. Pastoral ministers should not presume to know the needs of persons with disabilities, but should rather, before all else, consult with them or their advocates before making determinations about the accessibility of a parish's facilities and the availability of its programs, policies, and ministries. Full accessibility should be the goal for every parish, and these adaptations are to be an ordinary part of the liturgical life of the parish. I can think of 2 examples of this. Had a conversation with a pastor recently who was trying to figure out how to provide a ramp from the floor level of the church to the sanctuary. And it wasn't that big. The sanctuary was only about a step up, but he wanted to provide a place, and so he asked me, did I think a wheelchair would be able to make this turn? And I said what I thought was the obvious answer: ask someone in a wheelchair. Have them come in and try this. So this is saying, consult with them, find out what their needs are, and how do we do it. And then the other example is here at the cathedral. We have a lift built into the sanctuary. I don't know if even our regular members know this, but it's there and it's broken. So it was designed so that someone in a wheelchair could go onto it, or someone who could not navigate steps, and then they could be lifted up to the main level. Esteban, Bill, do you remember this working at any time? It must have.
I've never seen it work.
But you know what I mean. It's been there since the renovation of 2003. So it's there. And I remember when Deacon Steve was with us, God rest his soul, that if ever there was a need for it, it was for him. We could have gotten him into the sanctuary, but he did what diaconal ministry he could from near the first pew. But these are the types of things we try to think about and make adjustments for. This is another document that comes from our own Conference of Bishops called Built of Living Stones. And it makes these points. Special attention should be given to individuals with visual or hearing impairments, to those who have difficulty walking or who are in wheelchairs, and to the elderly with frailties. In addition to ramps, elevators, braille signs, and special sound systems that can be accessed by those who need assistance, staircases should have at least one railing. If the sanctuary is elevated by steps, an unobtrusively placed ramp with a handrail should be provided to make it possible for everyone to have access to the sanctuary. Again, we're not a good example of that at the cathedral, but you see what the ideal is. We do have good sound access from what I understand. We have a few people who use our system. It's possible to wear a special device that plugs you right into the sound system, and you can get it right into your ear. In the sacristy, according to the various forms of celebration, there should be prepared the sacred vestments. When the entrance takes place with a procession, the following are also to be prepared: a book of the Gospels on Sundays and festive days, a thurible and incense boat. If incense is being used, the cross to be carried in procession, and candlesticks with lighted candles. When the people have gathered, the priest and ministers wearing the sacred vestments go in procession to the altar. So it envisions a sacristy with some of these provisions. But a lot of us have two different sacristies, one that is a vesting sacristy and one that is a storage sacristy, if you will. And so we've created that here now with this renovation. We have a vesting area in this new building for the Sundays, and the working sacristy that we use as vesting also on weekdays. Okay, the altar. The altar on which is effected the sacrifice of the cross made present under sacramental signs is also the table of the Lord, to which the people of God is convoked to participate in the Mass. And it is also the center of the thanksgiving that is accomplished through the Eucharist. I'm showing you this so you see the function of the altar and the centrality of the altar. It is a place of sacrifice and the table of communion, a place where we give thanks to God. It's desirable that in every church there be a fixed altar, since this more clearly and permanently signifies Jesus Christ, the living stone. In other places set aside for sacred celebrations, the altar may be movable. An altar is said to be fixed if it is so constructed as to be attached to the floor and not removable. It is said to be movable if it can be displaced. So ours is pretty well fixed. You're not going to move that altar very, very easily. But I was pastor of a parish once where we had designed a simpler altar for the space, and in retrospect I can see where people thought you could theoretically move it if you needed to. We had a group using the church once for a spiritual performance, a devotional performance of some kind, and they asked permission to move the altar, and I said absolutely not. But I can see where, because of the way it was built, you might think it could be moved, but the stationary nature of the altar signifies the permanence of Jesus Christ, the living stone. The altar should be built separate from the wall in such a way that it is possible to walk around it easily, and that Mass can be celebrated at it facing the people, which is desirable wherever possible. Moreover, the altar should occupy a place where it is truly the center toward which the attention of the whole congregation of the faithful naturally turns. The altar should usually be fixed and dedicated. So you can see the value here that the altar is not the priest's altar, but the altar of the people as well. Everybody has visual access to it. And not just visual access, but it is the center toward which the attention of the congregation naturally turns. I think this is confusing to some Catholics depending on how the church is constructed. You might walk into a church and think the place where your attention is naturally drawn is the crucifix or the tabernacle or a statue that you love. But the attention should naturally be drawn to the altar. We build churches for the celebration of Mass, and that is where the spotlight is. The altar is to be covered with at least one white cloth. In addition, on or next to the altar are to be placed candlesticks with lighted candles, at least 2 in any celebration, or even 4 or 6, especially for a Sunday Mass or a holy day. Or if the diocesan bishop celebrates, then 7 candlesticks with lighted candles. Likewise, on the altar or close to it, there is to be a cross adorned with a figure of Christ crucified. The candles and the cross with the figure of Christ crucified may also be carried in the procession at the entrance. On the altar itself may be placed a book of the Gospels, distinct from the book of other readings, unless it is carried in the entrance procession. We see a lot of different points going on here, but I think you'll recognize most of them. First of all, with regard to a cloth, formerly we were required to put 3 cloths on the altar. Now only 1 is required, but it is expected to be white. So if you like to have liturgical colors on a cloth for a season, that's fine, but those might be the undercloths, if you will, and the white cloth would be the one on top of the mensa, and the others could provide a more decorative appeal. And then with regard to the number of candles and where they're put, they may be on or next to the altar, and you see this sense that the increased number of candles lends to a deeper celebration, a bigger celebration. It doesn't require 2 candles for a weekday, 4 for a feast day, 6 for a Sunday or solemnity. It doesn't say it that way. It just gives you a little bit of freedom of what to do. There's a passage in the book of Revelation where the Son of Man is walking among 7 lampstands, and that seems to be the backdrop to the recommendation or the request that when a bishop presides, there are 7 candles, because he will especially represent the presence of Christ for the church in the community. We're supposed to have a crucifix at every Mass, so there should be one positioned near the altar. The processional cross may be a crucifix, and we'll see here on the next slide that if you don't have a permanent crucifix in the sanctuary, the processional cross may be used as the crucifix for Mass. You just stand it up near the altar, and it takes on an additional function there. And then all these items may be carried in the procession. Floral decorations should always show moderation and be arranged around the altar rather than on the altar table. You can just tell in a line like this that the general instruction is protective about the altar. It doesn't want just anything to be put there. And even when people are cleaning the church or photographers are laying out their equipment after a wedding, the altar is not a shelf where you can just set things. It represents Christ. It's we kiss it, we incense it, we bow to it. It has a dignity in the church that is different from others. So we try to be very careful about it. Even floral decorations don't belong on top. It's next to it or near it. The cross adorned with the figure of Christ and carried in procession may be placed next to the altar and serve as the altar cross, in which case it must be the only cross used. Otherwise, it's put away in a dignified place. So here we have a beautiful crucifix in the sanctuary that I think is beautifully placed and really serves us very well. We still use a processional cross on Sundays, but we set it aside when the procession reaches the sanctuary because the other crucifix then comes into service in its connection to the Mass. The candlesticks required for the different liturgical services for reasons of reverence or the festive character of the celebration should be appropriately placed either on the altar or around it according to the design of the church, of the altar and the sanctuary, so that the whole may be harmonious and the faithful may not be impeded from a clear view of what takes place at the altar or what is placed on it. So the candlesticks are not supposed to serve as a kind of wall between the people and the altar. They need to have visual access to it. They are offering their sacrifice at this altar as well. So the candles need to respect that, the full presence and participation of the people. Before I go on to the ambo, do you have any questions, comments, anything? I've been talking for 30 minutes. Do you have anything you want to say or comment on? Read.
Yeah, I found the comment about facing the people being preferable an interesting comment. That's a post-Vatican II change, wouldn't it be? Because I feel like the traditional Latin Mass would be otherwise, and then of course I understand this to be the Roman Missal, so that probably is a distinction between other rites of the church, but especially the Divine Liturgy is still practiced by the Byzantine, and how that's connected.
Yeah, thanks, Reed. So the question is about the participation of the people and how that value is certainly a post-Vatican II value. As I mentioned, it actually comes out of Lumen Gentium with this concept of the people of God who have a right and a duty to participate at the Mass. Now, some of the people from the 62 Missal will say, well, everybody is participating. They're just participating in a different way. It's a quiet way, a prayerful way, which has its value. But you can see what the interests of the liturgical renewal were about engaging the people's full active participation in voice, posture, song, and in gesture in many, many different ways. And then the Byzantine rite, that's a totally different animal. We're talking about the Roman Missal and its directions. Yeah.
Or is, when the bishop presides here, we have another crucifix on the altar facing him. Is that just, personal preference, not necessarily?
Right, so the bishop likes to have a crucifix on the altar facing him, an additional crucifix. That is his personal preference. I think Pope Benedict did it, and that is what inspired many priests and deacons to adopt that as well. I have never adopted it personally because I don't see it in these rubrics. When I look at the general instruction, it seems pretty clear to me there's meant to be one altar and one crucifix. And just as there's one altar shared by all the people and the priest in the offering of sacrifice, so there's one crucifix as an image of Christ whose sacrifice we are participating in anew. So the way I read it, it's set up for one crucifix, but others say other presiders say they'll find there's a devotional value to them to have the crucifix there.
And then altar candles must be at least 51% beeswax.
That is not in here. There's no beeswax percentage required from what I can see. The Paschal candle is supposed to be made of wax and is not supposed to be, I think it's not supposed to be paraffin, but I might be misspeaking that. I don't have that quote in my immediate mental reserve, but it seems to me there's something special about the Paschal candle that's different from the others. There is a long tradition behind the 51% beeswax, but from what I can tell, it was never, that rule did not carry over into the revised liturgy.
Because that's certainly budgetary.
Yeah, yeah. I've spoken a little bit already about how protective the general instruction is about the altar. It is also protective about the ambo. So look at 309 with me. From the ambo, only the readings, the responsorial psalm, and the Easter proclamation, the Exultet, are to be proclaimed. Likewise, it may be used for giving the homily and for announcing the intentions of the universal prayer. Period. The dignity of the ambo requires that only a minister of the word should stand at it. Now, I think we're pretty good at honoring this at the cathedral. Every so often, we'll find somebody steps up to the ambo for a different purpose, and we try to get that corrected as soon as possible. Somebody may want to lead a rosary after Mass, and they stand in the ambo, and you're really not supposed to do that. At a funeral, somebody wants to make some reflections about the deceased, and they want to go to the ambo. They're really not supposed to do that. Somebody may want to make an announcement. They're supposed to use a different microphone. That the ambo is sacred territory for the Word of God and the parts of the Mass that pertain to it. I'm always astonished at how broadly this is ignored, not just in the United States, but around the world from what I can tell. If there's a microphone and you need a mic, you go there, and it has more to do in people's minds with the mic than with the ambo. But the place of the ambo is sacred. And I really think if parishes paid more attention to this, you would find that ambo becoming electrified. You would see it as something just really very special. When someone stands up there, this has to be anchored in the Word of God. It's going to be something extremely special. The responsorial psalm, of course, may be sung from the ambo because it's the psalm. It's the word of God.
And a minister of the word is someone who's been designated to read the scripture, correct?
Well, yeah, but it could be any lay person who is
Yeah.
appointed to do that. Yeah. So whoever the first reader is on a Sunday, a volunteer. We have people who volunteer at weddings and funerals they've never read before in their lives. They come up to the ambo and use it for the
But
reading.
somebody stepping up there at the beginning of Mass saying, "Welcome to St. Swithin's," and here are the announcements for today.
Yep.
That's a no-go.
That's a no-no. That goes to a different microphone, the cantor microphone. And when I was pastor in Cameron, I had a little mission church in Maysville. It seats about 50 people. If I had to make an announcement before Mass, I would just stand in the aisle and talk to the people, but I would not stand at the ambo. You just got to honor these points.
So is that why, you go to Mass, the cantor has their own station, and then
Correct.
we go to, okay.
Correct, and that's why the cantor has a regular station for leading the singing of the people. But when it comes to the responsorial psalm, which is from the Bible, then the cantor goes to the ambo and takes part in the liturgy of the word from there. Jerry?
Well, like a funeral where someone comes up to do a eulogy, not the priest or minister, but assigned to go out, or they do the rosary, at the ambo, those are acceptable?
They are not.
Ah,
They are not acceptable at the ambo. So at a funeral, if someone is giving a eulogy, a memory of someone, if somebody's leading the rosary at a funeral, those should be led from a different microphone, a different place. The ambo is for the Word of God 24/7. That is, yeah, so I'll show you this slide just so you can see it. And again, you see how protective the general instruction is about this. From the ambo only, the readings, the responsorial psalm, the exultant are to be proclaimed. It may be used for the homily and the universal prayer, period. That's it. So it's highly restrictive. And as I say, it's broadly ignored. So I have no delusions that I'm going to change the world with my talk tonight. But I do think people should be aware of this. And I think you would find the ambo grows in dignity when you use it properly and don't abuse it with other purposes. The chair of the priest celebrant must signify his function of presiding over the gathering and of directing the prayer. The deacon goes to the chair together with the priest and there stands at the priest's side and assists him as necessary. So the chairs are obviously they're where we sit, but they're also where we stand. When we're standing at the chair, it means we're doing a certain presiding function. So I didn't give you all of these quotes, but it does say, for example, at the beginning of Mass, the priest is supposed to be standing at the chair, not at the altar. It's another place that I think people ignore what the rubric says, but we're supposed to be standing aside from the altar at the chair and then use the altar for the liturgy of the Eucharist, but not for the liturgy of the Word. So the Missal has certain places in mind that take on their function, and we're to honor those by where we put ourselves, by what we do. And notice too that the deacon is at the side of the priest. We sometimes have to reprogram ourselves when there's more than one priest here or there's a bishop here with a few different priests. No matter how many priests are up there, the deacon is next to the celebrant of the Mass. He always gets up there next to that priest. It's not like we have the bishop and then the priest concelebrants and then the deacons over here. The deacons have a duty right next to the bishop, right next to the presider. That's where his chair belongs. It's the concelebrants who make room for the deacon. Some things on the tabernacle, and I'm giving you this quote from a liturgical book that even a lot of priests don't know about. It's called Holy Communion and Worship of the Eucharistic Mystery Outside Mass. And I'm not going to throw this country under the bus, but there is an English-speaking country that doesn't have this book at all. And it's been out for like 40 or 50 years, and they've never done approved the English translation for it. But it's an important document for us in terms of communion services, in terms of offering benediction. Anything that involves the tabernacle but not Mass is covered with this particular collection of rituals. And this is what it says about the tabernacle. The principal and original purpose of reserving the Eucharist outside Mass is, and I think most Catholics would flunk this test, the original and principal purpose for tabernacles is the administration of viaticum. A lot of Catholics don't even know what viaticum is. It's the communion you get before you die. Please don't wait until the person can no longer receive communion before saying, we need a priest. You need a priest sooner than that, or a deacon or a communion minister to give viaticum. But that's why the tabernacle is there, so that the dying may receive communion. That's why we keep one. The secondary purposes are the distribution of communion and the adoration of our Lord Jesus Christ present in the sacrament. Those are secondary. So it's primarily there so that we can offer this ministry to the dying. The most holy Eucharist should be reserved in a truly prominent place. It's strongly recommended that it also be suitable for private adoration and prayer. This will be more easily achieved if the chapel is separate from the main body of the church, especially in those churches where weddings and funerals take place more frequently, and in those that are visited by many on account of pilgrimages or of artistic or historical treasure. So our cathedral is one of those churches, and that's why our tabernacle was placed in an area designed to be somewhat apart, although still very visible and very accessible to the main part of the church. But it is meant to be in a side place so that the rest of the cathedral can be used for other purposes. People want to walk around, gawk, get Bill to give them a tour. They can do all of that without fear of irreverence, because the tabernacle has been given a dignified place separately. The presence of the Most Holy Eucharist in the tabernacle is indicated by a veil or in some other suitable way determined by the competent authority. Near the tabernacle in which the Most Holy Eucharist is reserved, a special lamp should shine continuously to indicate the presence of Christ and to honor it. In accordance with traditional custom, the lamp should be fueled by oil or wax. So that tabernacle light can be fueled in a different way, but it's not supposed to be an electrical switch that you turn on. It's traditionally, it just says it's just the custom. You use a traditional fuel. In accordance with the structure of each church and legitimate local customs, the Most Blessed Sacrament should be reserved in a tabernacle in a part of the church that is truly noble, prominent, conspicuous, worthily decorated, and suitable for prayer. The tabernacle should usually be the only one, be irremovable, be made of solid and inviolable material that is not transparent, and be locked in such a way that the danger of profanation is prevented to the greatest extent possible. Again, you see how protective it is about the tabernacle. It also likes it if it's in an area where people can go pray. A lot of our churches have tabernacles against the back wall, which turns the entire building into a place suitable for prayer that has pluses and minuses. If the main purpose of the building is the celebration of Mass and the altar is the center of attention for the celebration of the Mass, You don't want to have the tabernacle in a place where it becomes the center of attention instead of the Eucharist that is underway during the celebration. It is more appropriate as a sign that on an altar on which Mass is celebrated, there not be a tabernacle in which the Most Holy Eucharist is reserved. So prior to the council, this was common. The tabernacle was right on the altar where the priest was celebrating Mass. So with the renewal of the council, it wasn't just the priest now faces the people, but the tabernacle was removed from the altar, because these serve two very different purposes. The tabernacle is the reserved sacrament, but the altar is the place of sacrifice where the Eucharist is being enacted here and now. So it is meant to be kept separately. And then the bishop can determine where it goes. This was a fairly new addition to the missal, giving this authority to the bishop. It doesn't say this about the location of the confessional or the location of the baptistry or the ambry. It just says it about the tabernacle. They want him to be able to weigh in on it. Images of the Lord, the Blessed Virgin Mary, and of the saints, in accord with the most ancient tradition of the Church, should be displayed for veneration by the faithful and arranged so as to lead the faithful toward the mysteries of faith celebrated there. Care should therefore be taken that their number not be increased indiscriminately, and moreover that they be arranged in proper order so as not to draw the attention of the faithful to themselves and away from the celebration itself. There should usually be only one image of any given saint. Generally speaking, in the ornamentation and arrangement of a church, as far as images are concerned, provision should be made for the devotion of the entire community, as well as for the beauty and dignity of the images. So Catholics have a long tradition about statues, stained glass windows, paintings, all kinds of things. This is all fine. It's just saying, remember, we're here for Mass, and not just the devotional pieces. And if your sanctuary is filled with devotional images, that can lead the attention of the faithful away from the Mass and toward their private devotion. So those are the concerns they're trying to honor and then keep in balance. In order that baptism may be seen more clearly as the sacrament of the Church's faith and of incorporation into the people of God, it should normally be celebrated in the parish church, which ought to have a baptismal font. In the past, the baptistries were kind of like a side chapel where you could gather 6 people, the priest, the parents, the godparents, and the kid to be baptized, and that was about it. But now they're saying really the church should be designed with a baptistry viewable by everybody. The ambry is the place where the oils are stored. The oils used for the celebration of the sacraments of initiation, holy orders, and the anointing of the sick, according to ancient tradition, are reverently reserved in a special place in the church. It should be secure and protected by a lock. Ours is not, but our vessels are so large, they're kind of hard to carry away without somebody noticing you're doing it. The vessels used to hold the holy oils should be worthy of their function and be closed in such a way as to prevent the oils from being spilled and to ensure that they remain fresh. For confessionals, the Conference of Bishops is to establish norms. It is to take care, however, that there are always confessionals with a fixed grate between the penitent and the confessor in an open space so that the faithful who wish to can use them freely. So you always are to have the option of confessing anonymously if you choose that. Provision must be made in each church or oratory for a sufficient number of places for sacramental confessions which are clearly visible, truly accessible, and which provide a fixed grill between the penitent and the confessor. Provision should also be made for penitents who wish to confess face to face with due regard for the interpretation of that canon that we just saw. And in Built of Living Stones, since the rite includes the reading of Scripture, the space should always include a Bible. We rarely actually have a reading from Scripture in a confession, but it is permitted. If anytime you're going to confession, you have a biblical passage that inspired you and you want to include it, you can say, I've got a couple verses I want to read before I confess my sins. All of that is perfectly acceptable. Appropriate artwork, crucifix, symbolic of Christ's victory over death, icons or images reflective of baptism and the Eucharist, all of this can help develop an atmosphere of prayer. So that's a quick once over of the principal spaces that you would find in a Catholic church, how the church deems they be arranged. What other questions or comments has this prompted for you? Right.
Father Paul, you know, I grew up with nuns. Sometimes people come to volunteer or help in the church, and they want to sit on the priest chair. People not supposed to sit on that chair for any other reasons. It's just a space just only they can use for the priest. Because every time I never sit on that chair, but I know when we were close to those chairs, when I grew up, the nun said, you're not supposed to sit on that chair with the priest sit. Is that the truth?
I would not be able to find a piece of legislation to back that up. All right, so there may be customs. Now, with regard to the bishop's cathedra, the big chair here, he's the only one who's supposed to use that. But you don't see a similar restriction on the chair. I think it's arguable that a deacon or a lay leader of prayer could use the priest's chair for certain occasions when there is no priest. But if somebody is taking a break and they want to sit for a few minutes,
it's okay.
let them sit.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's fine.
No, I want to clarify that because sometimes it's just those things that stay on your mind. That nobody else supposed to be sitting on that chair.
It's probably fine.
They call the cathedral, for the bishop.
Yeah, the cathedra is different.
It's a little different. Okay.
Yeah. You can, go ahead, Steve.
Now I know I can sit on your chair.
Thanks for doing this, Father Turner. When you spoke about the tabernacle part, that was very informative. And in past, we used to take the host or the before it was consecrated at the beginning of Mass, and you put it into a separate container, and it was carried up, and then that was distributed. Is that related to the change that the tabernacle was primarily for the administrative? I want to say administrative is sick, but I know that's not correct.
No, it's somewhat connected. There were some parishes that had this custom where when you came into the front door, you kind of indicated your desire to receive communion by taking a host from a generic container and putting it into a vessel that was going to be used for Mass. I was in some parishes where people got confused, and they walked in and they took one from the vessel and put it back the other way. And, you're just entrusting this to too many people. But in a sense, I ask our sacristans to do that themselves before Mass and to try to make a good guess for how many hosts we're going to need. We're successful at daily Mass. Sunday is just really hard because at a cathedral, you've got visitors coming, people arriving late. We have no idea who's coming to communion. We do a fairly good job of it, but daily Mass we can usually manage. And I'm rather proud that at daily Mass at the cathedral, we never use the tabernacle. So you're always receiving communion consecrated at this Mass as part of this sacrifice that you came to participate in. You're getting that communion right away. You're not getting the host from a different sacrifice from the tabernacle, but this one. So this sacrifice becomes more living.
Okay, that's clear. Thank you.
When it comes to the differences or like the distinctions of a cathedral, I've heard of certain elements elements like the 12 pillars that aren't necessarily reserved only for the cathedral, except for the cathedra, but then also that we still refer to one of the parishes up in St. Joseph as still a cathedral. So like or is that maybe just an honorary title from days gone by? But what are those distinctions of like a cathedral beyond just the cathedra, or are there any?
It's primarily the cathedra. I don't think just architecturally there's anything else about the building. It tends to draw extra attention because of its dignity. So you might have a better artistic representation, a larger seating capacity than some others. But I can't think of anything that would make a cathedral different. There is a separate designation called basilica. Conception Abbey, for example, is a basilica. And that's a special honor given to a church. There are some cathedrals that are also basilicas. But you can tell a basilica because it has inside it an umbrella and a bell. And I'm not even sure how that tradition evolved, but if you go to the cathedral in Santa Fe, New Mexico, that's a cathedral basilica of Santa Fe, and both those items are there as well as the cathedra for the bishop. But in our diocese, the cathedra is here, and the bell and the umbrella are at Conception Abbey.
Then sometimes it's just like St. Fidelis in Victoria, Kansas, which is the Capuchin.
Yep.
Was that it's called the Cathedral of the Plains,
Yes.
just because it's big, it's out there in the plains,
Yeah.
but that's just a popular title. It's not-
Right. The cathedral is in Salina.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, Jared?
Father, on receiving communion, I don't remember that it was covered there, but I know there are different ways to receive communion on the tongue or by the hand.
Yeah.
And is there a requirement that the receiver of the communion Eucharist has the right to receive which way?
Correct.
And if the priest refuses that, how should people in the pew handle that?
Yeah. It's back in the general instruction that I've been quoting from quite a bit. It's in Numbers 160 and 161, where it's stated twice that the decision about receiving in the mouth or in the hand belongs to the communicant. It's that person's decision. So if a priest is trying to take that away from the communicant, then the communicant can report that to the priest's supervisor. In our diocese, that would be the Vicar General for Clergy, Father Charles Rowe. Yeah.
Thank you.
At the tabernacle, the candle, is it always red, or is that just a tradition, or is that something that's required?
Yeah, as far as I know, that's just a tradition. I'm not sure how that one evolved, but it is pretty consistent worldwide, at least from my travels. I can't think of another color for the sanctuary lamp that I've seen. So it might just be that in an age when all candles were the same color, you wanted to somehow set this one apart, and putting it inside a red vessel did that and drew a little more attention to it. But I'm purely speculating here. It certainly is a tradition, and it's worth preserving, but I don't know any place where it is required to be read. Yeah.
These general instructions you're talking about, they seem to pay attention to, design of the church, right?
Yeah.
Are they, I guess, when were they instituted? I mean, it seems to account for people with disabilities and AV equipment, I suppose. Are they revised often to keep up with the times? And
Yeah, the most recent revision was in the year 2000, 2002, 2008. That was the most recent one, and then we got the English translation of it in 2012, kind of the final English translation of that earlier one. but that's like the third time since the 1960s that it's been updated. So it does happen from time to time. If something needs to be addressed, it could be addressed in a different way with a different kind of instruction or law that would be put into play. But the Vatican tries not to change that very often. It's so important to keep something stable with regard to the liturgy. And you can find it online. You can read the whole thing online. Brian?
Towards the beginning of the presentation, you were talking about how if we can't celebrate Mass in a church, like we would have to go to an alternate appropriate space. What would be an example?
Yeah, so Brian's asking about an alternate space. I could think of two examples in our diocese in my own lifetime. When Bishop Boland was installed as our bishop, I forget what year this was, but he was like 2 bishops ago. He wanted a bigger space than the cathedral and to invite the entire diocese to come. So I believe he used municipal auditorium downtown, and we had the installation mass over there. And then, of course, a little over a year ago, maybe 2 years ago now, we had the big celebration of Mass at Liberty Memorial with exposition of the Blessed Sacrament afterwards. So we had thousands of people gather for an outdoor service. So those would be a couple of examples where, because of the crowd, or anticipated crowd, we wanted to have a different space, but still a dignified space that could be used for this purpose.
Notice you talked about the way we're supposed to say Mass there in front at the table, but then in years past they used to do it right in front of the tabernacle. I'm seeing a return of that here in this diocese, where more priests are facing the tabernacle, having Mass there as opposed to facing the people. What are the church's guidelines regarding that? Is that an arbitrary decision by the priest, by the bishop, or kind of what's going on? It seems to me like a return to pre-Vatican II.
Okay, so the question about the direction of the priest. I showed you in paragraph 299, I think it is, how the altar is supposed to be apart from the wall so that the priest may face the people, which is desirable wherever possible. So it's clearly the intention of the missal that the priest be facing the people. Now, some priests like it a different way, and some bishops are letting them do it. But you look at how the Holy Father presides for Mass. I mean, he's not turning toward the wall for it, and even Pope Benedict, who saw some value of it, didn't do it himself as Pope. So I think you see the intention of the liturgy is for the priest to face the people. But even if the priest is facing away from the people, the tabernacle cannot be on that altar. I mean, if it is, it's got to be empty of its contents. So the tabernacle has to be elsewhere, not on the altar of the Mass.
So, when we come into the Mass, our focus and attention should be at the altar. When we genuflect, and everything should be in that direction.
Yeah, when you enter a church, it is appropriate to make a reverence to the tabernacle. Or if the tabernacle is in a side chapel and you have time, make a visit there, or at least acknowledge it in some way, that upon entering and leaving a church, a genuflection to the tabernacle is appropriate. But then a bow to the altar would be appropriate otherwise. So I certainly during the Mass, you see all of our liturgical ministers here at the Cathedral, when they enter or leave the sanctuary, they make a bow to the altar, which is what's called for in the ceremonial of bishops. It shows even through the first part of the Mass that the altar is the heart of what we're doing here. This is why we're there. But apart from Mass, then the tabernacle rises in importance, if you will, and becomes the focus. So I just would remind you about the proper reverences. A genuflection goes only to the real presence of Christ. So it goes to the tabernacle, and the priest genuflects 3 times during the Mass, as the bread and wine are consecrated and before he receives communion. for the same purpose. But then it's a bow to the altar to show respect for the altar. And I know this is hard for some people to think through, but if we were more unified on this as a church, I think we would see some real benefits. Here, I know people mean well, but at daily mass, I frequently see people go in, make a genuflection, and then take their pew. And I think they're doing it just because you genuflect before you sit down. That is what you do. But there's no tabernacle in our chapel.
No.
Okay, so the genuflection really belongs to the tabernacle before you go into the chapel, and then a bow to the altar, and then you go take your place. Or again, very well-meaning people, after they receive communion, make a genuflection to the tabernacle. And I'm like, oh, what did you just receive? You know, where is your head? But I say I know people mean well. They're trying to exercise devotions, but if we could get more uniformity around when do we and where do we genuflect and when do we bow, it would lend a little more coherence to what we do at Mass. All right, thank you all. I went over 8 o'clock, but thank you all for attending.